Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, the president of the Russian Federation, and Tsar Nicholas II. So Nicholas II was the last Tsar of the Russian Empire, and how Putin has been often called the new Tsar or the Tsar of corruption and so on. But there are some striking parallels about Putin's situation now and that of Tsar Nicholas II 105 years ago, before the February Revolution. And incidentally, this war began in February this year, this illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. And a lead on to the question of whether Putin is actually going to provoke a revolution against himself in Russia. So the bizarre thing is the way Russian history, in a way, has come full circle from 1917 being a grossly unequal country to then the communists trying to make it the most egalitarian country in the world to being a grossly unequal country again. And there's something about civilization that actually tends towards inequality. The more economically developed we get, in a way, the more unequal we get. All right, there are fairly egalitarian societies, like, say, Sweden, where the gap between rich and poor isn't that huge. But if you look at other highly advanced economies like the United States or the UK, there is a very big gap. And I know there can be quite a lot of inequality in underdeveloped countries, but if we go back to when we're all cavemen, we just had nothing. So there's actually quite a lot of equality when we're living in very small bands of hunter-gatherers. But in both cases, Russia was a dictatorship. And now, Putin, he does allow other political parties, but they're all shades of Putinism. You can choose light, dark Putin, middle Putin, light Putin, or whatever. And yes, there are candidates against him, but the system is massively and flagrantly rigged. There's Holos, this civic advocacy group, which got a hold of the footage because they used to film live all the polling stations, and it wasn't recorded, but there was a way to capture that. And they sat through watching tens of thousands of hours of this from polling stations all over Russia. And the election officials would check that nobody was looking, go and get other ballots and stuff the ballot box with them. I mean, presumably for him. And I even know someone who told me that she'd done it. These things are often done at schools on a Sunday, and teachers are often had to be electoral officials. So, goodness, emphasizing the Orthodox Church, even though Russia's formerly a secular state, Putin likes to be seen there. The Orthodox Church is really just an arm of the state. Patriarch Kirill has given his imprimatur to this war, despite its many atrocities against another Orthodox people. The militarism in both cases. Russia is actually a very big military spender, even under Nicholas II, always has been, which is part of the reason most people live in such dire penury, is because really nothing was spent on welfare, education. The government spent almost nothing, healthcare, and so on, upgrading the transport system, helping with agriculture or whatever, or spreading industry. A lot of that was left to the free market. There's the appeal to anti-Semitism. Obviously, Nicholas II was an outright anti-Semite, always using the opprobrious term Žide, as his Prime Minister Count Sergei Vita said, never using the ordinary Russian word for Jews, Yevrei, and saying that these revolutionaries, remember, they're not real Russians. 9 out of 10 of them are Jews, which is a major exaggeration. But it is true Jews tended to be anti-regime because they were so viciously persecuted by this barbaric regime of pogromists. The Black Hundreds urged on by the Orthodox clergy and Tsarist officials to commit barbarous acts against defenseless Jews. The brutality in the army, the recruits, so just so severely beaten up, zombified, that they go on to commit atrocities against civilians. And starting, in a sense, a war of choice. Well, Putin, it really was a war of choice. Okay, in 1914, Russia could have backed down, but there'd be major disadvantages if they had. War probably just happened anyway. So the situation isn't exactly parallel. And this war causing an absolute calamity for Russia. I mean, a cataclysm 1917, it took years to recover from, just knocked them back years. I mean, even the First World War. So both men were in some ways very conformist in their appearance and very categorical in some ways in their thinking. You have to be this, and homosexuals are bad, and you have to like follow the crowd, and you have to be normal, and you can't think for yourself or be independent minded. So really cowardly like that. They're both unusually short men. It doesn't affect some people badly at all, but Napoleon complex really is a thing. Some short men overreact, overcompensate for it. That is short man syndrome. So they're both in some ways control freaks, certainly in politics. I mean, I know Nicholas II found it fairly dull, and they said, when a government official came to speak to him, he'd soon want to be entertained with tart gossip and start picking his nose. They both loathe democracy. They both detest pluralism. Um, so don't want opposition groups to be allowed. And if you're not an Orthodox Christian, they're quite cheery about that. So yeah, leading the country towards disaster. The ineptitude is there. The logistical failures in the war. And that's always been a headache for Russia, it being such a huge country. Um, um, and they seem to sort of sparking off secessionism. Obviously, revolt in Central Asia in 1916, or Poles saying, "Yeah, we will fight on the German side because then we might get independence, released autonomy." And so on. And the Ukrainian separatist movement getting going during the First World War, obviously right after 1917, with Lenin's blessing initially, the non-Russian areas of the empire going independent. And Putin's trying to rebuild the Russian Empire. So he had some of these countries as satellites for a while, but because his model is so unattractive, we know Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia over the last 30 years have gone right the other way, joined the European Union and NATO, and Ukraine was trying to do the same. Georgia wants to do the same. Azerbaijan has absolutely no desire to have close links with Russia. Okay, trade with Russia, but they're not in the Collective Security Treaty Organization. They do not want to be part of the Eurasian Economic Union. And Armenia does it because they have to, because Russia's their lifeline, or they could be wiped out by the Turks. Kazakhstan is in it, the only substantial member. Belarus is in it because it's just a mendicant beside Russia's door. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan to somewhat, but they're cozying up to China. They got Chinese military bases there, and they're so poor they've got no choice. It's really a liability to Russia, not an asset. And Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan are strictly neutral. So if anything, he's driven away parts of the former Soviet Empire, former Russian Empire. They don't want part of him. They want to be closely connected. These former Eastern Bloc countries, even Bulgaria, thought to have the greatest affinity for Russia. The only Eastern Bloc country that seriously considered accession to the Soviet Union, and there's very little desire to be back in Moscow's orbit. Even Serbia might be going away, not that it was even in the Warsaw Pact. So if that's secessionism of a kind, it's actually repelled people. He's driven them away when he would like to attract them. And because seduction is failing, he's trying abduction. But obviously the comparisons can be pressed too far. This is not exactly the situation. No, I mean, Nicholas II at least succeeded in growing the economy a lot in the first 20 years of his reign. And Putin, there was some steady economic growth in the early years. He's lucky with the oil and gas. But obviously he's ruined it for the last 8 years, whereas it's slowed down and obviously it's gone into reverse. The economy is going to shrink something like 20% this year. And probably for the next several years, sanctions are going to cause it to shrink a few percentage points each year. So from where they were in February this year to where they'll be in 10 years' time, the Russian economy will have shrunk enormously. Maybe something like 40%, population going down. So it just failed, even in his own terms. So Nicholas II at least pretended to reform, to democratize. Now Putin's moved right the other way. He inherited a genuinely democratic system. Now it said the 96 election was rigged. I think the 2000 presidential election was actually fair, but the media is almost entirely on his side. But the votes cast were genuine, and there were real opposition candidates, and there was actually a free media. But it's true that most journalists were pro him. But he has dismantled that piecemeal and built a totalitarian state in all but name. Shut down just virtually any human rights organization, any civic advocacy organization. They're all foreign agents. You can be jailed for the slightest thing, criminalize peaceful protest, 15 years in prison for telling the truth. It's part of this growing assault on history, on memory, on just force feeding children with absolute lies, hyper nationalist, militarist, toxic falsehoods. It's very worrying, this brainwashing of children at such an impressionable age. So anyway, there are obviously other differences. I mean, Nicholas II was a hereditary monarch. He was a linguist. He was in some ways accomplished, a bit cultured. He had a fairly happy marriage, despite his wife's histrionics. I think he had one affair with Matilda Kshinskaya. I mean, Putin treated his wife abominably. You can tell that. Before, she said before they met, she'd be in a metro station to meet him in the 70s, long before mobile phones, and he'd be about an hour late, just to emphasize his importance, that she'd be crying. I don't know why she stuck around with that little twerp. But there you are. So someone who really wants to underscore his importance and treats people appallingly like that. He's really just despicable. In politics aside, just a loathsome individual. So obviously that marriage has come to an end. Is he married to Elena Kabayeva? Possibly. Probably has 3 or 4 children with her. But Nicholas II was indecisive, dithering, who really didn't really have a grand plan. I suppose wanted to keep the empire united, a bit like his father, orthodoxy, nationality, autocracy. But he had greatness thrust upon him. Read his diary for what the day his father died. Oh my God, father is dead. Now I'm the Tsar. I never wanted this. Was Putin was a man of scheming ambition. He was always a chiseling little crook, an absolute nauseating sycophant, which is why he demands such sycophancy himself. He's sucked up and kicked down because he probably has to get that taste out of his mouth. He's been arse licking all his life. And so he demands the most shameless and revolting sycophancy from his minions. He's also a shameless liar. Well, I don't think Nicholas II was actually dishonest. I suppose he didn't really need to be. So I don't think that Putin will cause a revolution. I don't think the hardship will be severe enough. And he's absolutely fixated with security. He spends so much in the military, obviously not to great effect. He's got a huge number of police officers and a Russia Guard. I've never seen so many police officers in the world anywhere as I've seen in Russia. So they've got a surveillance state and they've got the instruments of oppression everywhere. So he will do anything. He would kill how many thousands of unarmed people it takes to keep himself in power. So I think partly the suffering won't be bad enough. Plus, he has the instruments of oppression to use and would not hesitate to use them, which is why I don't see him being overthrown. I think only the Grim Reaper will take him out. But the good news is that probably going to be quite soon because he's so gravely ill. We might be lucky, it might be a lot sooner than we hope, than we realise. Trouble is, as a replacement, will probably be even worse. Thank you for watching. Bye.